Hello everyone, this is part 6 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. In comparison to entering the country, leaving proved to be far more of a chore. The two of them had been checked for any contraband, which Naruto knew to mean any signs of rebel influence. It had taken a good hour before they were cleared to finally leave and cross over into Kusa no Kuni. Unfortunately for them, despite leaving the land of rain, the clouds overhead made no attempt to dissipate. Shizuku's mood seemed somber after that. Naruto had never taken much stock in borders between countries. They were mostly artificial anyway, only really being true on maps. However, the difference between Am and Kusa was almost strangely apparent. No sooner were they out of the relatively flat and barren country behind them before they found themselves walking through a large, jungle-esque area. Everything from the plants to the animals seemed vastly oversized. Mushrooms the size of small buildings seemed especially prevalent. Another strange thing was that there seemed to be no obvious roads anywhere. They seemed to stop right at the border with Am. This left them to trek through the jungle with only a small map to tell them the way. Naruto was never sure why, although he suspected it had to do with his Deva Path's gravity abilities, but he always had an innate sense of direction. He just instinctively knew which way was north and such. That proved helpful when the sky overhead became blotted out by the thick canopy of jungle foliage and they couldn't even tell where the sun was. However, this had the added benefit of blocking the rain, which lightened the mood for the both of them. Although they could have done without the rather oppressive jungle heat. Along that line, the two had abandoned the raincoats they had picked up in Am in favor of their lighter attire, Naruto in his robes and Shizuku in her Miko outfit. However, they decided to keep the Shugegasa hats they had picked up. Naruto liked the look of them and they kept the upper half of his face hidden, meaning he could keep his eyes open without anybody seeing them. You know, as a monk I'm supposed to be in tune with nature and the animals around me. Shizuku was quietly giggling to herself as Naruto held his hands in fists, the one around his shakuju turning white. But that would be a whole lot easier without all of these bugs. As if to prove his point, a rather large and lazy-looking fly landed on Naruto's outstretched arm. The blonde was physically restraining himself to not just slam his other hand down on it. The jingle of a monk's shakuju was for the express purpose of warning insects and bugs away from him so he would not step on them. Unfortunately, they did not seem to be getting the message. I have no idea what you mean. Her voice was calm, but Shizuku still had her hand across her mouth to suppress her giggles. Naruto had been getting more and more irritable the further they got into Kusa, far from the usual serene monk persona he normally wore. Naruto just cast her a rather pointed glance, his eyes momentarily flaring with chakra to light up his Rinnegan. Why isn't this happening to you? The girl just shrugged. Honestly, she too had thought it was rather strange that not a single insect had come anywhere near her since arriving in the country. I don't know, I guess animals just like me better. Naruto just gritted his teeth as he shook off yet another bloodsucker looking for its next free meal. He sighed irritably as he noticed the area around them growing darker. No doubt the sun was going down, not that they could see it. Alright, well, we might as well stop for the night anyway. At that, Shizuku froze, looking at Naruto with wide eyes before turning that same frightened gaze around her. Here, as in the middle of the jungle. Naruto nodded absently as he began the process of unsealing all of their equipment and supplies. Are you kidding? Did you see the size of some of the animals we passed? Naruto quickly waved her off with a smile as he continued to lay out the two sleeping mats they had. He had made sure to pick up a second one during their trip through Am. Don't worry, this is the perfect opportunity for me to try something out. Her anxiety being replaced by curiosity for the moment, Shizuku calmed down and looked at her blonde companion in interest. What? Naruto just cast her a quick smile she knew meant he was either planning something or wanted to keep it a surprise. He settled down into his usual meditative position and began seeping his chakra into the ground. Then, with all the control he could muster, he began to raise his arm, and to Shizuku's amazement, the ground around them began to break down, quickly replaced by fine golden sand. His face scrunched up in concentration, the blonde raised his other hand up, As if obeying orders, the sand began to move, circling the pair until it formed a makeshift hut. Phew, I don't know how Gaara did that with such ease. He was nearly tackled off his feet when he stood up, only to have Shizuku run at him, grabbing onto his shoulders and looking at him with wide eyes. That was so cool. Can you teach me that? Naruto chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his head as he sat back down, Shizuku descending with him onto her knees. Not really. The girl's face fell, which made the blonde's heart clench slightly at the sight. Oh, is it one of your Rinnegan abilities? Naruto quickly shook his head, only to earn a look of intense confusion from his female companion. No, actually it's something I picked up from a friend of mine, Gaara from Suna. Shizuku just frowned, poking at the walls of the makeshift hut to find them surprisingly strong and unyielding. Well, if you picked it up, why can't I? Do you not think I'm good enough? Again Naruto found himself faced by a girl on the verge of tears, and once again found his arms flailing out in front of him for no discernible reason. No, nothing like that, it's just, well, it's complicated. He looked down a bit at that. It sounded like a rather pathetic excuse, and Shizuku seemed to agree. What do you mean complicated? Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. He closed it with a frown before repeating this 3 times. He looked over at Shizuku. He wasn't sure if he was ready to tell the girl about his tenant. However, as soon as he looked at her, he saw that moment when she was sitting in the cave, rain pouring down in front of her as she curled in on herself. With a soft sigh, his eyes lightened slightly and she turned back to look at her again. Have you ever heard of the Bayou? Wow. Shizuku just sat there, shocked at everything she had heard. She might have thought it was a joke if Naruto hadn't been so serious as he talked. Are you alright? The Violette just nodded dumbly, her eyes unfocused as she tried to process it all. It sounded so fantastical. Her friend contained the most powerful demon in the world, and now another one too, if his story was anything to go on. Yeah, it's just a lot to take in. Naruto nodded sympathetically. It was shocking enough when he had been told. Finally though, the girl seemed to snap out of it, looking around the sand hut with renewed awe. So you can do all this with sand because of that second demon inside of you, Shukaku? Naruto quickly nodded, waving his hand to a small pillar of sand grew between them to demonstrate. Yes, the previous host was also able to do it too, but to a greater degree and with much more ease. Although that was probably due to the fact he had his entire life to practice, this is still fairly new to me. Also, calling them demons is probably incorrect. They are just beings made entirely of chakra. Bayou would be the correct term. Shizuku stopped her awed gazing as she swiveled in place, looking at Naruto with a raised eyebrow. Tailed beast. Isn't that just as negative? Naruto blinked at that before looking down with a frown. She did have a point after all. Unfortunately, that is the only thing I can call them. Anything else and people wouldn't know what I was talking about. Shizuku sighed but nodded all the same. Her hands began idly playing with the sand on the ground, drawing absent patterns with her fingers. I wonder what that would be like, to be locked up inside of somebody just because you are powerful and feared. It just sounds so unfair. I mean, like you said, they can think right. No intelligent animal should have to be caged up like that against their will. The blonde just stared at her for a moment, surprised but smiling all the same. Well, the QB certainly doesn't make itself easy to talk to it. It's an uphill battle with that fox. Shizuku giggled at that. The thought of Naruto acting so flippant about such a powerful being was a rather amusing thought. Anyway, it's about time we get onto your chakra exercises. Shizuku's laugh immediately turned into a drawn-out groan, and it was Naruto's turn to chuckle. Those don't sound like the noises of the best student ever. He laughed again as she just looked at him with a deadpan expression before her head slumped forwards. It's just so boring though. Can't we do something else for once, like learn how to manipulate fire or wind? Naruto put his finger under his chin in a thoughtful expression as Shizuku's gaze turned hopeful. No. Her head immediately fell again, and Naruto could have sworn the sounds of rain above them actually increased for a moment. You need chakra to do those things, and right now you still haven't managed to find yours. The blonde was moderately surprised as his friend's head shot up, a determined expression across her firm features as she pulled herself into a relaxed cross-legged pose. I'll do it this time. She closed her eyes as a look of intense concentration appeared on her face, crinkling her brow as her tongue started to poke from the corner of her mouth. Naruto sat against the wall of his self-made hut, watching the girl carefully, noticing no change in her chakra whatsoever. After about 5 minutes, Shizuku's shoulders slumped forward and she let out a long drawn-out breath. This is impossible. How am I supposed to find my chakra when I don't even know what I'm looking for? Naruto sighed for a moment before looking up with what he hoped was an encouraging smile. You have to look deep within yourself until you find that tiny spark of warmth. You have to lock onto it and concentrate hard, fanning that spark until it becomes a small flame. Shizuku still looked dejected, and for good reason. Naruto had already told her all this before and she still could not find what he was telling her to look for. The blonde thought for a moment, perhaps he was just going about this the wrong way. Tell you what, if you manage to find your chakra tonight, I promise that tomorrow I will teach you how to climb trees without your hands. Shizuku's head shot up, stars twinkling in her eyes as she remembered how Naruto had introduced her to the concepts of chakra in the first place. Once again a determined look crossed her face, however this time she tried to get into a proper meditative position like she had seen Naruto do so many times. The blonde was mildly impressed, her posture was a little off but it was a close approximation. Deciding to get his own time in while he could, he got into the correct position, closing his eyes as he allowed his mind to clear. Father's back. Naruto couldn't help the small smile that broke on his face as he heard the ever-excitable voice of Shukaku break through the calm of the seal. Quiet, you pitiful tanuki, that mere ninja is and never will be the sage, so be silent before I end your pathetic ramblings myself. And of course Naruto immediately sighed as the Kyuubi's angry retort once again plunged the seal into silence. It is good to see the both of you as well. The Kyuubi had become a lot more irritable since Shukaku had been added to the seal. As far as he understood, the two couldn't actually interact on a regular basis. When Naruto wasn't in the seal, their individual cells separated, or at least that was the impression he got from Kyuubi's contemptuous statements. However, Naruto came into the seal quite regularly, and thanks to the fox's intense disdain for his fellow Beiyu, that was enough to set him on edge. Quiet ninja, you are just as pathetic for never denying Shukaku of his insane delusions. Naruto once again sighed. This was how it would always go. He would enter the seal, Shukaku would greet him, and the Kyuubi would have some scathing comment that would immediately induce the tanuki into a fit of rage. Sure enough, not a moment later Shukaku began angrily banging on the bars of its cage, thrashing against the reinforced metal with its whole body. Brother shouldn't say that. Father will get mad at you and then you'll be punished. The Kyuubi merely grunted in annoyance before laying its giant head back down on its paws, ignoring the enraged cries of its fellow Beiyu. Arg. Don't ignore me, fox. The best he got was a small twitch of the Kyuubi's ears, causing the sand construct to let out another murderous cry. Naruto sat there in the middle of the room, just watching as the Ichibi vented its frustrations against the bars of its cage. Suddenly its ear twitched and it looked around, its eyes quickly settling on Naruto as it inched its face closer to the bars. Father should tell the fox, father should punish the fox. You are father, you have to be father, you have father's eyes and father's staff and father's hair and father's eyes, and I bet you have father's other possessions too. Naruto suddenly blinked in surprise at that. He had known about the sage's legendary artifacts before, but he had never had a clear answer what they were. Between the Bijuu's insane attitude and almost sycophantic worship, he forgot that, like the Kyuubi, it too must have known the sage. Shukaku, remind me about my possessions. Out of the corner of his eye Naruto saw the Kyuubi crack open a single eye and glare at him. He was obviously affronted Naruto would actually impersonate the sage just to get answers, however there was nothing he could do. Shukaku on the other hand practically preened, glad to be of help to the one he saw as his progenitor. Of course. There was father's necklace, it was shiny and red. There were father's pots, you told us to stay away from those or we might get hurt because father was nice and he cared. Father had a sword too, but he never cut people with it. Shukaku never understood why, but father would pat Shukaku on the head when he asked. There was also. The Beiyu gained a look of intense concentration which might have amused Naruto if he wasn't so interested right now. The look of happiness as realization dawned on its great face might have been amusing in another situation. The rope. Father had that gold rope. It nodded once in satisfaction as its enormous tail swayed back and forth behind it contentedly. It peered down at Naruto with yellow eyes, expectation apparent on its sandy face before it leaned down. Knowing what to do now, Naruto quickly walked over and scratched the enormous sand construct on the head. It let out a massive sigh that shook the bars of the cage slightly as it slumped onto one side. Naruto almost expected its giant foot to start twitching in pleasure, but thankfully it didn't. Naruto didn't think he would be able to get that image out of his head. You did good, Shukaku. If anything, the great creature's look of contentment increased before soft but still bone-shaking snores reverberated around the seal. How pitiful, using his insanity for your mindless questions. Are you the depraved ninja? Naruto looked over and gave the great fox a small smile, although there was a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. I have to use the resources available to me, although its descriptions were rather vague. He looked up, not entirely expecting a positive answer to his question. Any help on that front? The QB just snorted, once again blowing a gust of warm air over the blonde, causing his robes to move in the breeze. Why, surely you have your loyal lapdog now. What possible use could I be, ninja? Naruto gave a small sigh as he returned to the center of the chamber, sliding down into a relaxed sitting position. My name is still Naruto. At that he could have sworn he saw the great fox roll its slitted red eye, but it may have been a trick of the light. How wonderful for you. Again Naruto could only sigh at the QB rebuking his attempts at engaging the great creature in meaningful conversation. Just leave so I can have my lonely cell back, it is better than listening to that blasted tanuki snore. Naruto gave a conceding nod before fading from the seal, allowing the QB to watch as the other cage vanished as well, once again returning him to his solitude. Naruto. The blonde's eyes shot open, searching around frantically for the danger as he heard his name being called. What is it? He blinked as he saw Shizuku a few inches in front of him, waving her hand in front of him. She stopped when she saw his eyes open before blushing and moving back when she realized how close they had been. You wouldn't wake up when I called. Naruto ran a hand through his hair as he leaned back into a more comfortable position, accidentally nudging his staff as he put his hands back. Sorry, I was talking to them. Shizuku's eyes widened for a moment, but she quickly shook her head of it. Naruto, I did it. The blonde blinked in surprise before a fox-like grin spread across his face. That's great. Shizuku beamed at the praise, her eyes closed as she basked in it for a moment. Yeah. I found that spark you were talking about then, just like that time you showed me. I felt that warm feeling in my body. Shizuku felt amazing, her senses felt more alert than ever, and she felt as though she could run miles without getting tired. It was as though she could feel the new energy coursing through her body like little streams of warm water. You didn't tell me it felt so amazing. Naruto just tilted his head slightly with a small nostalgic smile. I wouldn't really know, because of the QB constantly dripping its chakra into my system. I've always had it. I don't know what it's like not to. Suddenly his smile turned into a confused frown as he looked over his companion, a blush suddenly alighting on the bridge of his nose. Shizuku, did you go outside or something? The girl blinked in surprise as she looked out of the hut before back to the blonde. No. Why? Naruto looked away for a moment, the blush intensifying as she moved. Your clothes and hair are wet. The girl blinked again before looking down. Sure enough, her skin had a thin sheen on moisture and her decidedly thin clothes were plastered against her body. Her eyes widened as she immediately threw her arms over her chest. She may have only been 11, but there were already signs of her becoming a woman. What the hell? Is this supposed to happen? Naruto just ran through his thoughts in confusion. He had never read anything about this happening at the temple. I don't know, here let me. He trailed off as he opened his eyes, examining the girl with his Rinnegan. His blush spread slightly, but it quickly disappeared as he frowned. Hey, your chakra changed and it's flowing differently. Shizuku was still covering her chest as she inched closer to the fire in order to dry off. Strangely, she noted that the heat seemed more uncomfortable than usual. She looked up at Naruto strangely, wondering what exactly he saw through those eyes of his. What do you mean different? Naruto just peered closer, which made the girl feel decidedly uncomfortable. It was like he was looking through her instead of at her. I'm not sure, your chakra used to be light blue like most people's. They all look different, but it's only slight. Now yours looks like a much darker blue, and instead of flowing erratically it's moving more calmly like water, or at least that's what it looks like. Naruto had nowhere near the vision of the Byakugan, so he couldn't perfectly see the movement of chakra through the pathways or tenketsu, but he could see enough to spot how it flowed and the color at least. What does that mean? Naruto finally sat back, allowing his eyes to narrow like usual, which was a small relief to Shizuku. He thought for a moment in silence as his friend continued to attempt to dry off by the fire, although it didn't seem to be working much to her distress. I have no idea. Maybe it has something to do with your elemental affinity. At this point Naruto could only speculate, while in Suna he had noticed slightly more difference in people's chakra that were ninja, especially Junin. However, it had never been to the extent that Shizuku's had changed. In any case, we won't find out now, we should get some sleep. The girl smiled timidly but gave a firm nod. Right. A small smirk played over her lips for a moment as she lay down to sleep. And tomorrow you teach me how to wall walk. This is awesome. It was a few days after Shizuku had managed to unlock her chakra and they were still making their way steadily through the jungle. The only difference was that Shizuku now took every opportunity she could to walk up any tree, mushroom or really anything vertical in sight. Naruto had thought it might grow tiresome to see her continually amazed by something that was so simple to most who learned to use chakra. On the contrary, it was rather refreshing to see her take such delight in such a small and trivial thing. Then again, he guessed a civilian who had only lived an ordinary mundane life would find such things to be extraordinary. He was surprised by her quick uptake. She got the exercise down within 2 days and was able to securely stay on the trees even while still. Although on the first attempt she had nearly put her back out trying to keep her body horizontal, forcing Naruto to teach her how to channel chakra to other parts of her body to reinforce her back and legs. Luckily, once you could send chakra to your feet, anywhere else proved to be much easier. Be careful. His only response was the echo of Shizuku's laughter as she jumped from one branch to another. He hadn't been thrilled when she began hopping from tree to tree, but she seemed fairly apt at it and he rationalized he would be there to catch her if she fell, so he allowed it. Suddenly she appeared by his side, dropping from a reasonable height but using chakra to both reinforce her legs and cushion the blow. Shizuku had been in relatively good spirits lately. Things were just looking up for her. The dense foliage meant that the rain couldn't reach them, something that was a rarity for her when she was outside. Plus she now had access to her chakra, which meant she felt full of life and energy, which only enhanced her now seemingly permanent bubbly attitude. The only strange thing was that every time she seemed to use chakra in large amounts she would get wet for no discernible reason. It's fine, you don't have to worry. Her smile practically sparkled despite the lack of sunlight reaching them through the jungle canopy. I have a great teacher after all, Naruto-sensei. The blonde gave a small sigh along with his customary smile. Not you too, Shizuku. The purple-haired girl merely gave a beaming grin before running off again, under Naruto's careful watch of course. He was glad the various large and dangerous animals were staying away from the pair for some reason, but it never hurt to be a bit too cautious. As he watched her run he felt a sudden weight appear on his shakuju. Looking around he was surprised to see a small capuchin monkey sitting there, staring at him with curious brown eyes. The blonde and the monkey just stared at one another for a few moments before the small mammal chittered excitedly. Hey, what the? Suddenly the monkey raced across his arm, his little hands and feet tickling the monk as they clambered at his body. It paused around his neck for a moment, sniffing at the magatama bead hanging from his ear before blinking in rapid succession and chittering again. He took it in his hands, nibbling it briefly before climbing down Naruto's back, once again eliciting a few laughs from the blonde. It did a full rotation around his waist before looking up, chirping like a bird and jumping off. Naruto just smiled as he watched the excitable creature run off before frowning as he noticed he was a little lighter than usual. Glancing down, his eyes widened as he realized the scroll containing all of their supplies and camping equipment was missing. He looked up shocked, just to see the monkey's tail disappear around the side of a tree. Without even thinking he took off after it, using chakra to augment his movement. Get back here. Shizuku saw and heard him run off, her eyebrows raised in confusion as she too took off after him, now somewhat able to keep up with the fast pace he set. However, as fast as Naruto was, the capuchin was far more maneuverable. It also knew the jungle better than him. The only thing that allowed Naruto to keep track of the quick little simian was his ability to see its chakra, even through the trees for a short distance. After leading then on a merry little chase where both Naruto and Shizuku were forced to dodge stray branches due to Naruto missing when he tried to use Banshu Tenon to capture the animal, the monkey finally stopped in a clearing. Naruto slowed to a stop, making very careful and deliberate movements towards the small black capuchin who was just standing there, occasionally nibbling on the end of the scroll with its small pointy teeth. Raising an arm, Naruto smirked. There was no way it would be able to dodge him this time. Banshu. Hey Naruto. The monkey's head whipped round, already chittering excitedly before it seemingly vanished into a pile of leaves. Naruto sighed as the monkey disappeared just as Shizuku jumped into the clearing. Why did you run off like that? Naruto turned to her, considering telling her off, but upon seeing her curious and innocent face he just didn't have the heart. A monkey stole the scroll with all the food and supplies. The girl blinked incredulously at the strangeness of the situation before letting out a giggle behind her hand. Well, did you catch it? Naruto just wearily shook his head, absently pointing to the pile of leaves the monkey had disappeared into. It ran off before I could grab it. He conveniently left out the fact that she was the one who alerted him to their presence in the first place. Shizuku just looked at him funnily before walking over to the pile of loose leaves. Hey cool, there's a door here. Naruto blinked before looking around. Sure enough, Shizuku was holding up one side of a trapdoor, peering down into the darkness it hid. Maybe the monkey went in here. Naruto just shrugged. It was possible. Shizuku smiled brightly at that before descending the steps. Naruto just looked at her like she was mad. What are you doing? Shizuku gave the blonde the exact same look as she continued to walk down the steps carefully. What do you mean? We need those supplies, don't we? She said it as if she weren't walking down into a completely unknown corridor in the middle of a jungle that had no discernible reason for being there. Now are you coming or not? With that, her head vanished as she walked further down the stone flight of steps. Naruto stared at the spot for a moment before his eyes widened and he ran after her. Hey, wait up. He caught up to her at the bottom of the stairs, peering into the inky darkness with difficulty while Naruto's superior eyesight had little trouble. It was just a long corridor with a few branches splitting off seemingly at random. The walls all had the same criss-crossing wooden pattern that was dizzying to try and follow, while every so often there would be a small inlet with an unlit candle adorning the wall. Naruto walked up to the first one and channeled as much fire chakra into his hand as he could. A small flame appeared over his fingertip which he quickly transferred to the candle. Oh great, how are we supposed to find the monkey in this place? It looks like it goes on forever. Naruto just sighed at the girl. It was her idea in the first place to come down here. Don't worry, if we get close enough I'll be able to see its chakra, even through a few walls. Satisfied now, Shizuku beamed before confidently walking into the darkness of the underground compound. Neither one noticed as they passed over an otherwise unassuming piece of floor, only for it to moments later crack open a single dull, brown eye. Just what is this place anyway? Shizuku was staring into the darkness beyond one of the many doorways lining the corridors as Naruto lit yet another candle with pure fire chakra. I don't know, it looks abandoned. I read that a lot of the third shinobi war took place in Kusa no Kuni, maybe it's some kind of ninja base. Shizuku blinked as she tried to make anything in the smothering darkness beyond what Naruto had already lit. Wouldn't there be symbols for the village everywhere then? So far it's all just the same wooden pattern and candle brackets. Naruto frowned as he moved on to the next spot on the wall, all the while looking out for any chakra signatures in the area. For all he knew, the monkey was long gone along with the scroll, alternately it could have just completely abandoned it somewhere. While sealing scrolls, like any fuinjutsu, did let off some chakra, it wasn't enough for Naruto to see through walls. I really don't think shinobi would go about emblazoning their symbols everywhere, especially during a war. Shizuku looked around in confusion as she abandoned the room, not being able to glean anything from the oppressive darkness. Don't they wear those forehead protector thingies with their village's symbol on them? Naruto nodded absently as he looked into a room. Seeing nothing but banks of old-looking computers and a few desks, he quickly came back out. Why do they do that anyway? I mean, aren't they supposed to be sneaky? Isn't having the village you're from printed on your forehead kind of counterproductive? Naruto sighed as the two moved on. He knew Shizuku was only making conversation because there wasn't much else she could actually do down here in the dark. I believe it's a matter of pride in your village, the place you grew up and want to protect. Shizuku nodded slowly as they walked, their feet clapping against the earthen slabs beneath them to echo down the hallways. But couldn't somebody just steal another village's forehead protector and frame them for something? Naruto gave a small smile as he lit yet another of the seemingly hundreds of candles in the base. I'm sure somebody has thought of that and actually tried it in the past. And I'm just as sure somebody has found ways of preventing it from happening again. Remember, if one village can do it, then they all can. Again Shizuku nodded slowly, her lip pouting out slightly in a rather cute manner. Yeah, you don't have to spell it out like I'm dumb. Naruto just chuckled as they walked on, his eyes scanning the area methodically for any sign of, well, anything. He smirked as he put on his best sagely voice and raised his head in an over-exaggerated display of haughtiness. A thing is never too often repeated which is never sufficiently learned, my young student. He only heard Shizuku mumble something under her breath as she crossed her arms under her chest and pouted again. And that's another thing, you should stop with all the wise proverb stuff. It's really, Naruto's eyes suddenly shot open in surprise as he leapt at the girl, tackling her around the waist to the ground just as a large slab of the floor flipped over. If he hadn't moved any sooner, Shizuku would have most likely been crushed beneath the weighty stone block. The Violette just stared at the spot with wide eyes, her breath coming out on short shallow gasps as Naruto quickly got to his feet again. Where are you? Come out. The blonde was worried, he had only sensed the attack moments before it happened by the minute amount of chakra leaking into the earth. Now though there was nothing at all to even indicate the attack had happened, the hallways were quiet and Naruto couldn't even see a whisper of chakra besides himself and Shizuku. Shizuku, stay close to me. The blonde whirled around when he met no response, only to come face to face with a wall of solid earth. Shizuku. The blonde placed his hand up against the wall, quickly drawing the chakra out of it before smashing his fist right through it, breaking down the now brittle earth. Unfortunately, all he saw beyond it was darkness. Shizuku was gone and Naruto couldn't even see her chakra signature. Shizuku. All he got was his own voice repeatedly echoing off of the wooden walls around him, mocking him with the shared plea. A growl rose in the blonde's throat as he slammed his shakuju down on the ground once, the sharp noise carrying all the way through the quiet base. I will raise this base to get her back if I have to. Do you hear me? Again only his own voice greeted his ears as the anger-filled call reverberated around him. Why, is the bite-sized monk angry perhaps? Naruto whirled at the voice that sounded like it was whispering right into his ear. Only a darkened corridor greeted him. Where are you? A dark but almost playful chuckling echoed from what appeared to be all around the blonde, like the very walls were speaking to him. Oh, but isn't that part of the fun in this little game of hide and seek? Don't you know, you trespassed on Orochimaru-sama's property and now you're paying the price. Naruto quickly composed himself with a deep breath, focusing on his chakra and not the voice that seemed to love to mock him. Oh, ignoring me. My, that just won't do. There was a pause as Naruto continued to scan the area for any sign of the mystery speaker. Perhaps you would be a little more inclined to indulge me if you knew what the prize of the game was. Naruto could now tell that whoever this was took almost sadistic glee in what they were doing. Find me if you can, little monk. I don't believe your young friend here has all that long. The voice began to fade away as it spoke, the last few words sounding like a whisper that was far too close for Naruto's comfort. Naruto slammed his staff through the corner of a wall in frustration, finding satisfaction in the chunks of mortar and splinters of wood now littering the ground. He quickly took another calming breath to stop his trembling fist before quickly forming 5 shadow clones, his current limit. However, as soon they began to run off into various corridors to cover more grounds, large pillars of earth grew at astonishing rates beneath them. 3 of them were instantly dispelled into clouds of smoke from being crushed, whilst another was pinned by its arm to the ceiling. Naruto cursed, dispelling the remaining 2 as he took off at a run. When his vision was split multiple ways, he lost some of his ability to see chakra, so it was harder to predict the attacks. As much help as the clones would be in covering more ground, they were useless if they couldn't get more than a couple of feet. What a naughty little monk, cheating is strictly prohibited. Naruto had to visibly restrain himself from shouting back at the mysterious voice, but he refused to give it the satisfaction. That same irritating musical voice just laughed at him as he sprinted down yet another corridor, sounding neither male nor female. The dark was no issue, his eyes granted him good enough vision to at least see where he was going. Tick tock, your friend's head's on the chopping block. Again the voice cackled madly while Naruto did his best to ignore it, frantically searching for any chakra signature he could find. Finally he found success as he rounded a corner to see Shizuku tied up, bound by her wrists and ankles, just lying in the middle of the corridor. However, as he approached her he slowed, shakuju raised defensively in front of him as his eyes narrowed. Shizuku. The girl blinked, her eyes opened tiredly before they landed on Naruto. Suddenly she was alert as she struggled against her bonds, shouting muffled words against the gag in her mouth. Naruto jogged over, staff still raised in a defensive manner as he quickly unbound the girl. She got to her feet wearily, rubbing her sore wrists before suddenly pouncing on Naruto, wrapping him up in a warm hug. I knew you would come, Naruto. Suddenly though the girl froze, her eyes going wide with shock as she jerkily turned her head to see Naruto with his outstretched fingers just finishing applying precise pressure point attacks down her spine. Naruto. The blonde's hair was shadowing his eyes as he stepped back from the now paralyzed girl, shakuju raised out in front of him. Where is Shizuku? The girl just stared at Naruto with wide, tearing eyes, unable to move her body. Naruto, what's going on? The monk's head sunk even lower as his hands clenched into fists. Seeing Shizuku that way hurt him. He strode forward, pressing his hand up against her stomach as his eyes narrowed. I will drain you dry of chakra if you don't tell me where she is. All of a sudden the frightened, timid look of the Violette's face vanished, replaced by a cruel smirk, far too wide for her own face. Her neck swiveled awkwardly at angles that weren't physically possible just to face the blonde as her usual teal eyes faded into a dirty brown. How very fascinating. Before Naruto's very eyes the girl before him lost all natural color, her entire form taking on an earthy brown hue before crumbling away into dirt. My duplicates are exact copies, there isn't a single flaw or strand of hair different, how did you notice the difference? Naruto pivoted on his foot to face where he thought the voice was coming from only to see a grotesque sight. The ground of the corridor in front of him bulged outwards, rising up into a loose, curvy pillar of mud that began to drip large chunks of mud onto the ground where it was absorbed back into the floor. Slowly as more of the dirt fell away a form was revealed, that of a tall, lithe man wearing a disheveled brown tunic and trousers with more dirt than fabric. However, most horrifically his legs seemed fused together, still attached to the floor as if he was simply a stray root from some plant. His skin was surprisingly pale from what Naruto could see beneath his dirty mop of dark hair that fell about his face, covering one eye and falling most of the way down his back. The one visible eye was the same dull brown that the clone had just before fading away into dust, gleaming with interest and a sickening glee. This was only strengthened by the abnormally large grin that almost threatened to split the man's face in two. My, aren't you just an interesting little monk? I wonder what else you can do. Naruto's eyes simply narrowed dangerously as he planted his staff in the ground firmly, taking a loose starting stance for the Kaminari no Mai. I'll show you, Banshu Tenin. The entirety of the man's upper body suddenly lurched forward as if pulled by some invisible rope, however he stayed firmly rooted to the floor. Naruto still used the opportunity to cover the distance between them, lashing out with a solid finger strike to a nerve bundle that should have paralyzed the man long enough for Naruto to complete the maneuver. However, to Naruto's surprise, where his fingers impacted the man, his body just crumbled away like loosely packed dirt. Oh, now that tickled. Without warning, the man's body suddenly extended grotesquely until he better resembled a snake, quickly wrapping Naruto up like a boa constrictor. With his prey bound, the man lowered his torso until the two were at eye level. Yes, I feel there are many fascinating things to discover about you once we get you onto the operating table. Naruto just grimaced as the pressure on his body increased as he was wrapped up tighter. Not going to, happen, Shinra Tensei. He struggled for a moment before his eyes shot open, one of the rings that circled his pupils contracting for a split second. Like a wall, an invisible burst of energy quickly expanded from the boy's body, strong enough to completely blast the man's snake-like lower body into chunks of useless earth. He lay there for a moment just staring at Naruto with those same lifeless eyes that continued to sparkle with intrigue. Oh yes, I will have to bring you to Orochimaru-sama himself, he will want to take a good, long look at you, Naruto. As he spoke, Naruto watched as his body seemed to melt away into mud, quickly fusing with the floor until there was just a pair of bloodshot brown eyes staring at him out of the earth, then they too vanished. The blonde quickly picked up his shakuju, leaning on it for support as he gasped for breath. Being slowly squeezed until you could feel your bones begin to creak was not pleasant. He tried to figure out what had just happened. When the man moved into the floor, his chakra vanished completely, like he was literally nothing but actual mud. However, while he was choking him, it was all too visible. Naruto didn't know how anybody could just vanish like that. It was weird, but he could have sworn the man's chakra was brown. That in itself was incredibly strange. He tried to rationalize that it must have simply been a clone of some sort, but the more he thought about it, the more he was sure that was the real man in the flesh, or mud. The worst thing was that Naruto realized why it seemed so familiar. The man's chakra was different in the same way Shizuku's was. However, instead of his chakra flowing like water through a stream, it seemed sluggish like liquid mud, trickling down a hill. In some places when he had been merging with the floor, Naruto had seen his chakra stop moving altogether. Naruto filed that information away for later. He was sure it would somehow be important. For now he still had to focus on getting Shizuku back. He continued to run through the halls, noting that the voice seemed conspicuously absent, as well as the fact that there seemed to be fewer choices about where he could go. Fairly soon, before he could get frustrated enough to start blasting through some walls, he found himself in a large open room that was already lit. The light hurt his eyes for a few moments after running through the dark tunnels for so long, and he was forced to cover them with his arm. When he lowered it, his eyes widened in surprise. The room was full of Shizuku copies, all of them fake if their chakra signatures were anything to go on. Disturbingly, they all felt like extensions of that one man more than normal clones, which put the blonde on edge. As if he could be summoned with a thought, the man appeared on the ceiling, melting out of the roof to hang there limply, again resembling a root. Before he could do much though, all of the Shizuku copies turned to look at him, their teal eyes watering. Oh dear, so many little girls to pick from, and yet all of them are fake, how sad. As he spoke, the man's body stretched down from the ceiling, his torso coming up to face the blonde with a sickening grin. Or are they? Naruto clenched a fist as he raised his other hand, ready to blast all of the clones away if he had to. I don't have time for your games, tell me where the real Shizuku is. Quickly the man out upper hand, a playful smirk on his twisted features. I wouldn't go launching one of those fancy gravity blasts, Naruto-kun. You see, little Shizuku is somewhere in the room. You wouldn't want to hurt her now, would you? Didn't you make a promise that she would never cry again? Naruto suddenly froze as he stared at the limp man, who simply grinned back like he was meeting an old friend after many years. How do you know that? And how do you know my name? The man let out a quiet chuckle that became increasingly sinister as it went on, suddenly dropping to the floor as his body splashed out like a drop of mud on the floor. As it congealed back together into his body, his head swiveled on his neck to stare with piercing eyes at the monk. Oh, but I know you, Naruto-kun, I know all about you. Your Rinnegan, little Shizuku, even the special guests in your stomach. The blonde took an involuntary step back as the man finally reformed, his legs still fused in that disturbing way. You see, Orochimaru-sama saw fit to grant me a tremendous power in return for keeping this little out-of-the-way base safe for him. He allowed me to become one with the earth, giving me an unkillable body of mud and dirt. Not only that, but I am able to reach deep into your mind with only a single touch, just one brush, and all your little secrets come tumbling out. He smiled again, his body growing slightly as he was raised higher into the air. I am Madara, guardian of the Northwest Research Facility. Now, how should we proceed with our little game? By this point, Naruto's eyes were shadowed by his hair, his hands clenched into fists that trembled ever so slightly. I said, give me back my friend. There was no prior indication, no subtle hints, no warning whatsoever. One moment they were in a brightly lit room full of Shizuku clones, the next everything just exploded. When the dust finally cleared, it revealed a large layer of sand covering everything, most of the duplicates themselves having been broken down into sand grains. Madara himself was tightly bound in a cocoon of the fine golden grains, only his head sticking out. You think a trap made of earth can hold me? Have you listened to nothing I've? The mudman suddenly paused, his eyes widening in panic as his struggle became more apparent. What are you doing? Naruto allowed the briefest of smirks to cross his features as he brought a second hand up, focusing all his control on the sand binding the slippery man. You know my abilities, so take a guess. The man growled in irritation, his face distorting grotesquely as he attempted to change his body and escape the sand prison. Your pret-a-path, but how? Naruto chuckled slightly as the sand began to constrict around Madara's body. You obviously didn't look all that hard into my memories then. The Preta path works against anything my chakra makes contact with, and this sand is saturated in it. His expression became darker as his glowing Rinnegan eyes pierced through Madara like he wasn't even there. Now tell me where Shizuku is. Even if your body is immune to regular attacks, I bet it won't work if you're drained of chakra. As if to punctuate the point, the mud man began to feel dizzy from the quick rate he was losing his energy. Go to hell, brat. The man tried to spit in Naruto's direction as the blonde walked closer, but the sand constricted even further, making him gasp loudly. The man's mouth twitched up in a sickening facsimile of a grin as he looked directly at Naruto. Go ahead, crush me. See if you get your little girl back ever again. Naruto just maintained his smile, which had once again settled into his usual serene look. I've already said I would raise this base to the ground before I allow her to be hurt. You've seen my memories, am I lying? The struggling man only growled again before laughing darkly between strained breaths. Anyway, he jingled his shakuju casually, causing the man to suddenly look at the simple staff with fear. I don't need to crush you when I have this right. Madara only narrowed his eyes as Naruto raised the shakuju until the end of the staff was just in front of the mudman's forehead. Last chance, Madara of the Northwest Base, tell me where Shizuku is. Naruto's only reply was another failed attempt to spit at him before his eyes narrowed and he tapped the end of the staff against the insubstantial man's head. There was the distinct sound of a gong ringing around the room for a moment, and when it passed, Madara had tensed up, his eyes glazing over slightly. Hey, you think this is the end, brat? Orochimaru-sama will find you eventually, nobody can ever defeat him. Eventually you'll be laid down on a cold metal table and he'll poke and prod at those eyes of yours until nothing remains. As the man spoke, his skin began to turn ashen, his hair falling away in clumps of mud as his body began to destabilize without the necessary chakra to hold it together. Just you wait and see, Jinchuriki, you'll die someday soon. Naruto narrowed his eyes as the last of the man finally melted away into a small brown puddle of the floor. His gaze was torn away as he suddenly heard a deep gasp for air and a choking cough. He looked around only to be surprised as Shizuku was held up by his sand in the exact position Madara had been in moments ago. With a thought that made his slightly queasy, Naruto realized Madara had been holding Shizuku inside of his body this whole time, and that was why he couldn't sense her or see her chakra. He allowed the sand to fall away, catching her as she fell to the ground limply, still drawing in large breaths of fresh air. Shizuku, are you okay? The purple-haired girl offered him a weak smile, her eyes lidded as her head bobbed exhaustedly in his arms. He got mud all over my Miko outfit. Her voice was rather weak and croaky, but it still managed to get a small laugh out of Naruto. Come on, let's go. He gently picked her up, pulling her soundly onto his back where she gratefully wrapped her arms around his neck to hold on. As they walked, her head would loll from side to side and her eyes began to droop, but to her credit she stayed awake. What did you do to him? Her voice was quiet, very different to how she usually acted. Naruto thought it was kind of cute. He just looked down thoughtfully as they made their way back through the winding passages of the base. My shakuju has the ability to permanently take away somebody's ability to use chakra. Without it, his body couldn't hold itself together, so he fell apart. Shizuku nodded tiredly as they walked closer to the exit, snuggling her face into his neck slightly to get more comfortable, eliciting a small blush from the monk. Is he dead? The girl felt he blonde tense at her words, his steps pausing for a moment, the bright light of the outside just a few steps away. No. And with that, Naruto walked on, vanishing from the base as his form was silhouetted by the bright light from outside. Oh hey, it's the monkey. Naruto's eye was twitching rather violently as he stared at the small capuchin monkey, who simply stared right back, chittering occasionally and nibbling at the scroll it was still carrying. Shizuku just sleepily waved at the small animal. It cocked its head slightly before parroting the action back to her, making the sleepy girl chuckle. He's cute, can we keep him? Naruto was still partially frozen, his eye now in excessive spasm as his mind rebooted from the crash it had undergone. He wasn't even in the base. Naruto's face was now a rather virulent shade of red as he trembled in mixture of exhaustion and frustration. However, Shizuku quietly giggling into his ear calmed him down somewhat and he settled for slumping down onto the ground. Shizuku finally took the opportunity to slip off his back, lying down on the soft ground and letting her eyes finally close to get some much-needed sleep. The monkey scampered over to the pair, occasionally turning his head this way and that as he took in the young blonde monk and his sleeping companion. He held out the scroll in his small hands, shrieking a few times before dropping it and scurrying up Naruto's staff to perch there, ignoring the blonde for now as he began to pick insects out of his fur. Naruto just blinked at the strange sight before falling over on his back, leaving the staff upright in the ground to not disturb the little capuchin. You know you really caused us a lot of trouble, little guy. The monkey looked his way for just a moment, observed him and quickly went back to what it was doing. Naruto gave a dry chuckle as he raised his hand, once again bringing the sand up to form a makeshift hut. He noticed his arms burned slightly from the large influx of the Shukaku's chakra he had used inside the base, but he figured a night's rest would fix that. It usually did for everything else. As his eyes began to close, he cast a glance over to where Shizuku was curling up around herself, pulling her thin clothes closer to her body. With a wary sigh, the blonde picked himself up and walked over, carefully draping his heavy cloak over her shivering form. Days in the jungle could be very warm and humid, but at night it could get very cold. He smiled tiredly as the girl instinctively pulled the cloak around herself before a frown manifested on his brow. I nearly lost her today. I wasn't strong enough to protect her at the start. I need to start taking my job as her teacher seriously. Starting tomorrow, I'll teach her things that will actually protect her when I can't. With a sleepy nod of satisfaction, the blonde retreated back a little, having the good sense to grab a sleeping mat before crashing down on it, falling asleep almost as soon as his head hit the ground. My elemental affinity. Naruto nodded as he walked. They were once again making their way steadily through Kusa no Kuni, now in an eastern direction on their way to Kaminari no Kuni. Yeah. Now that you have access to your chakra and have begun control exercises, we should get your affinity as soon as possible. Shizuku's eyes lit up. She had really recovered well from the whole underground base incident and was back to her old cheery self by the morning. Then again, that may or may not have been due to the new traveling companion they had picked up. The little capuchin was currently riding along on Naruto's shakuju, occasionally playing with the rings at the end of the staff to make them jangle more. Shizuku had affectionately named him Masaru, although Naruto had no idea why. Oh cool, then can you teach me awesome jutsu like breathing fire or firing bolts of lightning? Shizuku was looking at him with stars in her eyes, which made the blonde slightly nervous. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly as he looked away, suddenly finding the grain of his staff's wood very interesting. Actually, the only jutsu I know is the shadow clone jutsu. Everything else is either due to my Rinnegan or my new sand abilities. Her shoulders slumped at that, with Naruto once again noting the sound of the rain increasing for just a moment. It might have been his imagination though. But I'm sure we can pick up some jutsu scrolls once we find your affinity. As if a switch had been flipped, bubbly, Shizuku was back, looking at Naruto with fresh determination and glee. Alright, so how do we find my affinity? Naruto smiled confidently as he strode on, noticing that the trees were beginning to thin out slightly and more of the rain getting through the canopy, which was a good sign. We need some paper, chakra paper. You channel some into it and it reacts differently depending on your affinity. Most people only have one, others with bloodline limits can have 2 or 3, and then when most shinobi become Junin they develop a second. Except you can only see your second affinity on chakra paper once you master your first, otherwise the first overpowers the second. You have to train to be able to hold back that specific elemental chakra. Shizuku nodded excitedly, happy to be finally learning something again, even though the ability to walk up walls was still incredibly cool. Alright, then, where do we get chakra paper? At that, Naruto smirked even as he pulled up his cloak's hood to protect against the rain, which was now becoming even more apparent. Well, there are 3 places in the elemental nations that produce it: Konohagakure no Sato, a few islands in Mizu no Kuni, and Takagakure no Sato in Tani no Kuni. Luckily, Takagakure is on our way to Kaminari no Kuni. Shizuku's eyes widened in happiness that they were already so close. Of course it didn't last long as she too pulled up the hood of her cloak to ward off the rain. Unfortunately, however, I have no idea where Takagakure is. Shizuku nearly tripped and fell over at that. Righting herself with a slight flush, she looked at Naruto strangely. The blonde merely sighed. They're supposed to be really secretive. Even merchants are blindfolded and led through some caves before they're allowed in the village. Chiraku-senpai had been there once. Apparently they get the paper from this enormous tree in the center of the village. Shizuku blinked in confusion, also to get water out of her eye as a rain droplet fell down her face, but mostly in confusion. Well, if merchants get there, it can't be too hard to find. Naruto just sighed and rubbed the back of his head. He almost used his shakuju to do it but remembered Masaru at the last moment. I wouldn't be too certain. The village prides itself on never having been invaded, not even once. As if some divine being chose that moment to stress Naruto's point, the tree line finally broke. The two preteens found themselves looking over a large cliff with an incredible vista-like view stretching out in front of them. As far as the eye could see, various valleys that seemed completely subsumed by forest spanned the landscape. Rivers flowed throughout the whole scene with various waterfalls dotted around from the numerous cliff faces. Shizuku blinked in amazement at the beautiful yet daunting scene. Wow, I can suddenly see why. Naruto on the other hand just groaned, having to lean on his staff for support all of a sudden. I still can't see any roads. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.